All right, so we talked about what Git is, a version control system, and we talked about what GitHub is, a community for Git repositories, I believe owned by Microsoft now, as of a couple years ago. But today's video is going to be more about GitHub Classroom from the student side. So what you're going to see when you interact with a GitHub Classroom. Usually you're going to be given a link to a repository of a specific assignment, or maybe even an organization, but usually an assignment that the teacher has set up. So I'm going to go to my email here, and I have a link to a repository that's been sent to me or been posted on my LMS. GitHub is going to ask you to log in, so you have a GitHub account that you're logging into. It's going to interface with GitHub Classroom. It's going to show you something like this, which is, hey, do you accept this assignment? It has some kind of prefix for the naming usually, and then your username will be appended to that repo in some way so that you know it's a specific repository for a particular assignment and your specific copy of that. All right, and then this way the teacher can manage different repositories, one for every single student. Okay, so I'm going to accept this assignment. It's setting up the assignment, copying the code from some template for me. All right, and then you're going to see something like this, a link basically to where that repository is. It might be a good idea to just keep that around somewhere so you can get to it any time. You can also find it in other places. Even the original invite link you could click on again, and I believe it will route you to the same place. But this is a link to the organization, and this is a link to your specific repository. So I'm going to click on that, and I can see the code that's been put in here. So this is a simple Hello World Java program, and there's some IntelliJ IDEA project files in here. So the idea of using a version control system is we want to clone this repo or get all of these files onto our local file system so that we can edit them and keep a history of them locally, but then also push them back up to this place here so that the teacher can see the changes that you're making with comments and all of that good stuff. So there's several ways to do that. I mean, if you see this big green code button here, if you copy this link here, that URL is going to be a URL directly to the Git repo. So you could do this from the shell we talked about, or you could use GitHub Desktop we talked about, which is a visual product that they have for interfacing with Git. So I'm going to use that. I'm logged in under that user, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and add or clone a new repository. You can see it's already kind of found this one because this is really the only repository that I have at the moment for this test user that I'm using. But you could also copy that URL in that we talked about. So you really have two pieces of information here. You have where you're getting the repo from and where it's going to be stored locally on your system. I want this repo, and I want to store it on my desktop. Okay, so I'm gonna go right to my desktop here. All right, you can see this is the name of the repository on my desktop. This is the one. I'm gonna hit clone, and it's gonna go get that code. It should be very quick, obviously, for this assignment, but depending on what you're cloning on GitHub, if it's a very large project, it could take quite some time. I minimize this, I go to my desktop, you can see we do actually have it here. And then the whole point of this is now I can start doing some editing, changing, adding files, removing files, whatever I want to do to modify this project or complete this project or assignment, right? And then I'm going to push those changes back up to the server. Because for this simple assignment, I actually have some IntelliJ IDEA files here. I'm just going to open with that. Maybe in your class, your professor is only going to upload source, and then you're going to use whatever IDE you want to do your programming, or maybe you're working in the shell or something like that. That is fine. It doesn't matter. I'm just kind of keeping it simple here for my students right now. I'm going to open up IntelliJ IDEA. I'm going to say open or import because these files are already there. Now, of course, I've set this project up and I've opened it up with the same IDE version that I used to set the project up. So everything just worked perfectly. But it is not uncommon for even one of my students to say, if they open this up and they have a slightly different version of the IDE, or they have a different version of the Java JDK, that they might get some errors or warnings saying that, right? Notifying them of that. And then you just have to work around them. You have to maybe change the project settings to use whatever JDK is installed, or you might have to install a new version of the IDE that the teacher was using, or there might even be some kind of conversion process where you can just take the information and it converts it to whatever version that you have. To complete this very simple setup project, what I'm having my students do is just kind of change this hello world message to something with their name. This user that I'm using the test with is Jean-Luc. So I'm going to save that file. I'm going to close this project down. We have a very simple change there. So now we're going to go back to GitHub Desktop, which we're going to use to submit these changes. And you can see already it's detected 2 files have changed. Now, really only one of them is what we're concerned with. This is the output message that we changed here. But some of the other files might change because these are associated with the IDE's project, things that you may not normally check into a repository, because if everybody's editing with slightly different settings, these files are always going to be changing. I mean, some of them are just like kind of local settings where Windows are, but we're going to just keep that for now. This is the change I really care about, and I'm going to say some kind of commit message like changed greeting. Okay, and you could put more here if you wanted to. So I'm going to commit that to my local repository, and you could go through the history of all those changes. And then I'm going to push those changes up. You see there's a push button here, and it says, hey, there's one change that needs to be pushed up to the repo on the server. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Make sure you have an internet connection. It's uploading those files. All right, and now I'm going to go back to GitHub Classroom, the actual repository here that was created for me. We can see there's 3 commits now, right? There's a commit 30 seconds ago. Let me look at a particular file that may have changed. So this file here we know changed, right? I could look at that. I could look at the history of that file, and you can see, you know, the teacher committed this initially and it looked like this when we click on it, and then here it is with our change here. I can go to this little hash here and it shows what has actually changed. So we can see the 2 files that were changed, what's been removed, what's been added. I could add comments, the teacher can add comments because we're both on this repository together. Now, this is a slightly different workflow than what some of you may be using. They have this like pull request system. That is a different workflow where you would kind of request to make these changes, and then there will be like a code review process. I'm just giving my students kind of direct access to the repo. They can make the changes they want, and then when the due date is up for the assignment, I will look at the latest code, and that's what they will be graded on. If you go to your profile on GitHub, so not GitHub Classroom, but on the regular GitHub, you'll see the repositories that you're involved with and changes that you have made. This repo that I set up for my students for this assignment was private, because I didn't want it really to be public to other students and other people outside the organization. So I did make it private, but because I selected to show private activity, you're seeing a link here. So you could always click that link here to get back to your repository. If not, I would just kind of keep this URL around, or the URL of the organization as well, so that you can always access these repos. If you're logged in as a student, you're only going to see your repos, but the teacher can see everything. So if I have 40 students, I'm going to see 40 repositories times however many assignments there are, and I have to organize that and access it a certain way to get what I want out of it. But it should be streamlined for the student.